All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Scrubbing the Skies, the webinar series of the Institute for Responsible Carbon Removal at American University. The purpose of the Institute is to help define the parameters of responsible carbon removal and help operationalize that vision in the United States and around the world. As always, I am the host of the show. I'm Will Burns, co-director of the Institute. Today, we look at an issue that is top and front for all of us, which is the health of the carbon dioxide removal markets, primarily in the voluntary context. As we know, as we start to move through 2025, as Grant Favor has recently observed, there's substantial peril, right? Given changes in policy, potential trepidation in terms of investment flows, and so forth. But one of the things that can be extremely valuable is to look at trends, right? Because while they are only by definition a snapshot, some of these things can suggest structural benefits, structural disadvantages that need to be confronted as we try to move through this choke point in 2025 and hopefully break through and start to scale to the levels that we realize are required for carbon removal as part of our portfolio of climate responses. Uh, we, in my opinion, in the last couple of years have been blessed by the development of a new company called CDR.fyi, who has kind of transformed how we look at carbon removal market data from the early days where a lot of this was simply piecemeal and anecdotal information to a point where we start getting robust, cohesive sort of analyses of what the market looks like. And so I think we all owe them a debt of gratitude for what they're doing. And so today we have the opportunity to meet with Alex Rink, who is a co-founder and CEO of CDR FYI. And he is going to talk in depth about their new report called Keep Calm and Remove On, CDR FYI's 2024 year in review. Some of you have probably already had the opportunity to read the blog post on this report. But this is an opportunity to lift the hood and explore some of the top line findings in a little more depth. So, as always, this will be our format. We'll start off with an initial intervention by Alex. We will then move on to a bit of a chat between he and I in terms of some of the topics that he's talking about, maybe a few others. And then we will move into audience questions. So, as always, I encourage you to begin to put questions in the Q&A box sooner rather than later. Once those questions arise is better because that'll help me gauge how much time to accord at the end in terms of those questions. And so with that, I will turn over the podium to Alex. Thank you for joining us, Alex.
Thanks very much, Will, and thank you, Seth, for setting us up today. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to chat with everyone here, and look forward to sharing a little bit more about your interview, and then just generally having a open conversation about durable CDR, as you said, Will, the market trends, and just generally what's happening, and any light that we can shed, on any questions or any sort of issues in the market. So that being said, why don't we just launch into presentation here? And are we seeing the screen, Will?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So as Will said, obviously grateful for the opportunity that we have to play the role that we do in the market. What do? We are a data clearinghouse, if you like, for durable carbon removal. I use the word durable. We think about carbon removal, the pathways or methods that are have permanence of hundreds to thousands of years. We aim to bring transparency, accountability, and honestly, some level of inspiration to the market by showing what others have done and hopefully, getting others who haven't yet participated to say, hey, if these have done something, then let's actually participate as well. A question you mentioned you mentioned in the introduction, Will, excuse me, about getting the data organically. It is true, a lot of it anecdotal in the beginning. There's really, a few different sort of primary sources of data. This is a question I get asked very often, so I'll just, give 30 seconds to it here in the beginning. But we get data from public announcements as one, and that was from the very beginning and continues even to this day. Registries, like Puro, Isometric, Reverse, CSI, and there's a variety of, ones out in the marketplace. Directly from suppliers and purchasers, we have a portal, which we'll get into, and then marketplaces as well. And we bring all that together, we reconcile it across, as we see different instances of the same transaction. Sometimes there's a bit of information in one, a bit more in another, bring it all together, combine it, and that's what forms the foundation of the data. And we use all of that data obviously to report in terms of leaderboard, in terms of the market trends, and just generally share more transparency about the state of the market. By the way, Will, I can't see you, so if there's anything that you feel is worth double clicking on, feel free to just jump in if you feel like something needs to be clarified.
Okay.
A variety of different tools and resources that we have available. We have an events calendar, around different events that are taking place in the space. There's a CDR map, which is very much appreciated. A lot of kudos to our colleague Tank Chen, who helped, who led the development of the map and continues to be its leader. Hundreds of companies, with the headquarters and projects that are identified on the map. We've got a CDR calculator. There's collaboration between Cole Caswell at 1.5 and Robert, putting that together and giving companies an ideas to, how much they should be allocating to CDR. And then we have a partner portal, which you can see there at the top left, and there's a data explorer, and there's market actors, and there's other elements to it as well. We have over 800 companies that have signed up for the portal. It's free sign up directly from our website. And so if anybody's not already on the portal, it essentially gives you a greater view into the durable CDR market on the website. Definitely encourage you to sign up. So, as you said, Will, let's take a look at the 2024 year in review and what kind of trends and what we saw last year. So, very high level, the top number is very positive. After a sort of like 7x growth from 2022 to 2023, we saw still another 78% growth from 2023 to 2024. So taking us from 4.5 to 8 million. You can see that Q2, so on the far right, those different tiers, if you like, are Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So Q2 was greater than the entire year of 2023. And made up 60% of the entire year. But, the other quarters were obviously meaningful as well. Now, there is sort of, an important sort of element to all of this, which is that the CDR market has been dominated by a handful of larger, companies and buyers. So Microsoft, Frontier, and Google, between the three, Microsoft alone was 64%. And you can see Microsoft in first place is like 10x of like number 3, which is Google. And those three together, who represented well in excess of 80% of the market last year. And so, positive story in terms of the top line, but there's a concern immediately beneath that in terms of the buyer concentration. If we actually take Microsoft out of the equation, it's still a positive story. And so you can see, significant growth in 2020, 2022, 2023. That's over 100%, over 100% 2023 to 2024. But obviously not, it's quite a bit short of the 8 million. So if we actually look at growth rates, it's positive in both cases. If we look at overall volume, it's certainly more, positive when we look at, when Microsoft is included. One thing that's interesting and something that we're keeping our eyes on, and for those who are here and listening to this, something for you to keep your eyes on as well. 100% of Q4 was not Microsoft. And so if you go back to, let me go back to this slide, you can see 1.4 million. And we go here and it's also 1.4 million. And in fact, actually, the last major purchase that Microsoft made in 2024 was in July from 1.5 for 500,000 tons. So they had a barn burner about Q2 when they announced over over 4.3 million tons out of the 4.8 that was there, and they did another 500,000 tons in July, but it's been crickets since July. And so definitely something for us to watch over, the coming months and year is to what extent and, Microsoft engages and how much. So purchasers overall grew, and I did mention that there was heavy concentration at the top. They grew, but they didn't grow as much as we would have liked. And so this is another thing that we're keeping our eyes on is whether it's total number of purchasers or purchasers over 100 tons. So total number of purchasers grew only unique purchasers, and these are sort of like publicly disclosed. Sometimes they don't disclose themselves publicly for a little while, and then later on we find out who they are because they're just want to get more comfortable or they want to like release the news at a certain point. So based upon publicly announced purchasers for 2024, there was a 7% growth overall, which as you can see is far short of the 78% that we talked about previously in terms of volume. And those over 100 tons, a little bit more positive at 22%, but still not keeping pace with the overall growth in the market. In terms of like what kind of sectors that we're seeing, it's definitely dominated by software, financial services, and services generally, buyer clubs and marketplaces. So that would include Frontier there. This is based on numbers as opposed to volume. So financial, very high numbers of purchasers, but if you actually look at the volumes of those purchases, they tend to be actually relatively small. So in terms of a percentage of overall volume, it's actually quite a bit smaller, but it's nice to see that there are a lot of them getting involved because what we do see is that when companies purchase, they tend to actually purchase more over time. So it's nice to see financial being a high margin sector getting involved. Software also high margin sector, services as well. So, there's important reasons I think for all of those to be engaged in the market, and it's nice to see that underpinning, if you like. I've already mentioned sort of like technology, financial services. One thing that's common amongst these three is that they have what's, as my co-founder Robert sort of like pioneered the study, a high profit to emission ratio. They also have, I think, other motivations in addition to their high profit to emissions ratio. Technology companies, often have sort of progressive employee bases and, want to know what's being done from a sustainability perspective. I think financial services have a vested interest in understanding and participating in this market opportunity. If it's going to be a multi-trillion dollar opportunity down the road, then there's money to be made. And so the sooner that they can get involved and understand it, the better. And professional services, and if you think about a lot of the sort of consulting firms, whether they be boutiques in sustainability or carbon removal, or whether they be larger firms like BCG and McKinsey, they have a vested interest in developing their practice areas. And if they're going to be guiding their clients on purchasing carbon removal and getting involved in the market, then it obviously makes sense for them to take an early lead in engaging themselves. In addition to these groups, we've seen some other clusters emerge, if you like. And so energy, there's a lot that we see from energy companies, whether directly as purchasers or traders, or just kind of sniffing around because there may be a big opportunity for them. I mean, a lot of the carbon dioxide is going to need to be sequestered, and it's going to be sequestered underground. And energy companies have a lot of experience in sort of pulling things out of the ground and a lot of experience in putting things back down. So I think that there's also an interest on their part in exploring and understanding this market further. Occidental Petroleum obviously has stepped up in a big way, bigger arguably than any others, as they purchased 1.5, developing a Stratos facility. Equinor came in as a key buyer at the end of last year. Shell Environmental Products is also a buyer. Aviation's another sector where we've seen it's, a hard to abate sector. They're looking for pathways to reduce, and it's not only is it hard to abate, but it's also extremely visible. And so I think they have a very keen interest in understanding what are their options, whether it be in sustainable aviation fuel or CDR. So examples of purchasers, not specifically in 2024, but in the past, Airbus, all Nippon Airways, American Airlines, British Airways. Also in this space, for example, there's a group called Skies 50 that purchased a large MCDR deal from Gigablue, and so also fits into the larger aviation category. And then, I think we're also seeing countries. I mean, the US had talked about a 30, got started in terms of the $35 million purchase challenge. I think that's unfortunately gone a little bit by the wayside with the new administration. Canada's come out with $10 million. Japan's become very engaged with the GXETS, and we're seeing, a surfacing of Japanese companies as well. So some sectors, as I mentioned, are some other pockets in addition to the traditional ones that I mentioned in the previous slide. So why are they buying? As I mentioned, there's like a high level of concentration in terms of the buyers, and specifically, I can pull out sort of Microsoft, Frontier, and Google, which is a Frontier affiliated company that have made the vast majority of the purchase or the volume purchase for last year. So what are the primary reasons? A lot of it is, I mean, in some cases, they're actually securing carbon credits. And so I think Microsoft would fall a little bit more into that category. They want reliability of delivery and, a certain price and know that they've got it locked away. But I think all of these at the early stages have some element of altruism or catalyzing the market. So if you actually look at, this came from a market survey that we did with Silvera recently, primary reasons for interest in purchasing carbon removal. And you can see market development, knowledge building, relationship building. It's all sort of an investment in the future of this market, in some cases for their own sake, but very often just for the broader market. The securing future delivery, securing pricing, those are things a little bit more, hey, let's serve our own needs. But we're seeing with these early buyers, they're thinking beyond their own needs. And again, taking their learning, not only in terms of the purchasing, but also in terms of the learnings and publishing materials that make it easier for other buyers to come to market. In order for the market to scale, pricing is going to need to come down. And so again, based on publicly announced pricing, and I'll throw in a caveat here, which is not only publicly announced, but also depends on sort of the mix of different methods. We did see that the weighted average price per ton sold, so weighted average being, take the total deal value, if you like, divide by the total ton sold. So it, favors the larger deals, if you like, did decline from 490 to 320. I just actually came off another webinar earlier today with where we did a pricing survey with Opus, and we were presented some of the findings. So it is critically important. Pricing is the most mentioned factor by buyers in terms of what they're looking at. And don't get me wrong, there's a ton of different factors, but if you ask them to list the top three, pricing will invariably be one of those top three. And so it is important that we learn how to bring the prices down, whether it be through supplier innovation, or just general, whether it be like subsidies, other forms of abating the price or bringing it down for purchasers will absolutely lead to increased demand. So that's definitely something we want to keep our eyes on going forward. Fortunately, not only do we see that in terms of the weighted average price, but also across most of the methods. And with most of the methods, we saw a decline in price, from 2023 to 2024. So again, positive trend overall. There were a couple of outliers here, but for the most part, it's going down. What's interesting about biochar specifically is that biochar, as many who have followed, our publications know, biochar accounts for almost all of the delivery that's happening. And so the spot market is occurring in biochar. And if you are a company and you want to buy carbon offset, durable carbon offsets and credits now, and you want to take delivery now, then you're pretty much buying biochar. And so what we're actually seeing is that's leading to an increase in demand in biochar, which is creating this sort of counter trend. And with the increased demand and, simple kind of supply and demand economics, certain amount of suppliers, they can only scale production so quickly. it's actually leading to an inflation in the price of biochar, which runs counter to the technology learning curve and that we see, and then reduction in prices in the other one. Suppliers are also growing. I mentioned earlier that purchasers have grown 7%. Suppliers are growing a little bit, a little bit healthier pace than that, but not at the pace we'd like to see. I don't think we're at the stage yet where we can afford to see the number of suppliers plateau for this market to truly scale to the 6 to 10 gigaton range by 2050, which is an oft quoted number. We're going to need more suppliers. But in order for more suppliers to come to market, there's got to be more demand. And so we're getting a little bit of a catch-22. We want more suppliers, but in order to get more suppliers, we need more demand. But in order to get more demand, we got to get prices down. And, so there's a little bit of a Gordian knot that needs to be unraveled here. And we can talk a little bit about, what might actually help that to happen. On the positive side, deliveries have picked up significantly. Interestingly, if you actually were to draw a line here, it's actually a very, a very nice exponential curve. The growth rate from each year to the next is almost exactly 120%. I think it varies between 115 and 125%, each year. And so we maintain that 120% growth rate from 2023 to 2024. And obviously that's going to be important, going forward that purchasers see that I mentioned biochar is, where all the delivery is happening now, but, for the other methods, they're increasingly going to want to see delivery starting to come through. And that will obviously pick up as those methods reach higher level maturity and technological sophistication. If we take a step back and look at investment in the space, it's actually gone down in terms of overall numbers. So it declined 30% from 2023. Really, when you think about kind of what 2024 was, which was an election year and uncertainty in the US and uncertainty about who was going to get elected, it probably, it certainly sort of intuitively makes sense that there would be a little bit of a pullback here in terms of overall numbers. On the positive side, the actual number of rounds increased versus 2023. So there were fewer rounds in 2023. Some were much bigger, so there's a big acquisition that actually skewed the numbers. If we actually, remove that, we're looking at overall if we actually remove sort of like large transactions, then you could say that the overall amount is higher. Definitely the number of deals is higher. And this which shows the stage of investment. It actually, what's very encouraging is that there's a lot of earlier stage. And so, if you look at orange is seed and yellow is Series A, there's a lot of earlier stage investment that took place last year. And then hopefully we'll start to see more of that come to fruition in terms of the scaling of these suppliers over the coming years. So overall, some highlights, from, what I've just shared here. Growth in the market, very positive. Unfortunately, quite highly concentrated at the top, and we'd like to see that spread out a little bit more. Delivery increasing significantly, which is nice. A lot of it, if not most of it, in biochar. Overall delivery to booking was 4.4%, but again, early stages of the industry, we know that will pick up over time. Investment capital down, but up if you exclude outliers, and overall a lot of it going into the earlier stages, which we'll hope to see bear fruit in the coming years. Some warning signs, as I mentioned, in terms of plateauing on purchasers, and the volume that's represented by the repeat buyers as opposed to new buyers. So we want to see what we can do to bring more new buyers to the market. And, just general challenges, I'd say there's a risk of premature price-driven competition. So being overly focused on price, but we're at a stage where we'd rather see more suppliers and frankly, some, whatever pricing is going to work to enable them to expand or increase their methods, because a lot of different methods are going to be required in order for us to get to the 6 to the 10 gigaton. I often think of this as like turtles going to the sea. And to anyone who's like, taking a look at turtles, a lot of them don't make it to the sea, but there's like, hundreds, if not thousands, who like crawl through the sand. That's a little bit what we need in terms of durable CDRs. We need like thousands of turtles going to the sand because only some of them are going to the sea because only some of them are going to make it through, and those that do are going to, grow and thrive, and that's what we want overall in the market. Overall, I think we have a lot of this information is available. If there's any more that you'd like to know about it, feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us directly at team@CDR.fyi. As I mentioned, we've got free portal sign up that's available. And for those who are so inclined, we have also premium products that enable us to support our mission of accelerating carbon removal. And that's it on the presentation. And back to you, Will.
All right. Thanks so much for that overview, Alex. So yeah, let's just move into a few questions between us, and then we'll move to audience questions. And again, I encourage folks to start populating the Q&A box, and we'll get there. Uh, let's start off by talking about the 10,000 pound elephant in the room, Microsoft, right? Total percentage of purchases, right, down a bit, right, from one year over another, which is good news, right, in terms of diversification, but obviously still an extremely important player, right? And you indicate that in the second half, pretty quiet. We're not entirely certain what's going to happen with Microsoft, but one thing that we did see in January was a very large offtake agreement from Microsoft to Chestnut, right? And this was an afforestation, reforestation company. So uh, uh, much cheaper credits, much quicker delivery, and I don't know if you know, but do you get any sense that some of the companies in the market that are interested in carbon removal are shifting away from durable carbon removal purchases to less durable, maybe primarily due to cost or other factors? Do you track that at all?
Yeah, we don't actually track in terms of the nature based, and so I'm not sure what the increase has been there. But it is something. There's actually a couple of data points, Will, that have caught my attention. One is Meta was a founding member of Frontier, and at some point last year, I can't remember if it was June or a little bit
August.
August, thank you. They departed from Frontier, and I think at the time it was they mentioned they wanted a little bit more sort of freedom or I think independence in terms of the decisions they were making and not necessarily following the precise Frontier guidelines or what the principles are in Frontier. And then somewhere around that time, they also actually, sorry, in May, they became a founding member of the Symbiosis Coalition, and which was a commitment to, or advanced market commitment to invest in, I think it was like 20 million tons of nature-based credits. And so I mean, I take that and I look at that and I think, huh, that's interesting. So we don't know. Meta hasn't actually gone public with what they've purchased in the durable space. And so I can't say what portion of Frontier's purchase was Meta, but we know that they're definitely making a commitment on the nature-based side. And then to your point, Microsoft is also one of those founding members of Symbiosis.
Mhm.
And 1.5 in July being the last, durable purchase. And yet, to your point, Chestnut and others, that there's a lot more that they're putting into nature-based. And so I can't say with certainty that there's a overall shift, but I think that there from a durable CDR perspective, I think it's worth it for suppliers to think about how do they sell the durable CDR product versus nature-based. You
Mhm.
know, how do you actually position the greater permanence and lower risk of reversal and lower leakage and so on, and put that in a way with a much higher cost that has a purchaser feel, yes, this is the investment that I want to make.
Yeah.
I
Let me ask you something about that, right? The cynic in me, right, and the cynic in me is strong, that says that what folks like Meta and Microsoft realize is that in a voluntary carbon market, right, where you're essentially um, uh, packaging or messaging what you're doing, right? Those kind of distinctions of permanence and reversibility, durability, are not something that most folks are going to be able to discern, right? And so, why worry about it, right? Just ballyhoo the fact that you're purchasing carbon removal, and do it on the cheap, right? And I wonder if that's the trend we're about to see, and what that bodes for in terms of the viability of a high integrity CDR market.
Yeah, look, I think it's an excellent point. And I think, it's really interesting because this is a very early stage market, as you know, and it's very immature. And so you're going to see a lot of different behaviors. And I think that there's a lot of learning that's taking place. And companies are going into it saying, oh, we should do this. And then they do it. And then they go, are we really getting all the benefit we want out of having done that? Should we try this instead? And so I think there's been a little bit of a pendulum if you look at the last few years where a lot of purchases, about the very cheap credits and older vintages and questionable integrity and quality and so on. And Guardian article and then a hard pendulum shift the other way. It's like, whoa, we got to stay the hell away from that because it's like incredibly damaging for our reputation. And then you have a variety of companies going, okay, let's go, right to the other end and let's get like very hardcore, high permanence, 10,000 years, 100,000 years, whatever. And maybe what we're seeing is a little bit of a pendulum shift back and certainly not all the way back. That is not what we're seeing because I think it's gotten a lot more rigorous in terms of the nature-based methods and conventional methods. But maybe a little bit of, oh, do we need to put in this much? And should we be the ones who are doing it? Now,
Mhm.
as you know, if everybody, you end up with a bit of a free rider issue, right? Because if everybody thinks that somebody else should be doing it, then nobody's going to do it.
Right.
And so I don't think that the right answer is, to go to what is the lowest, cost, for the minimum, what's the minimum bar I need to surpass in order to get the external credit, reputationally or internally with our employees or whatever the case may be, that we're doing something. There is a company that was going through kind of a durable CDR purchasing program, and a question they asked is like, hey, why should I buy something that sequesters for 1,000 or 10,000 years if realistically we as a company are unlikely to last that long? And I think it's a totally valid question, but what I'm hoping that we see, the word that keeps coming to my mind about this space generally is leadership.
Right.
And what got us into the climate problem in the first place is, let's call it selfish thinking, like thinking for what is best for me and my company and maximizing profits and not considering, the broader ecosystem and environmental impact. And we're not going to solve the climate issue by continuing to act in a way where we don't allocate any portion of our investment, if you like, to broader ecosystem. I think it can't just be about what's good for me and us. I think there's got to be a change in thinking overall in the world towards, let me allocate some extra. Let me actually take care of, let me pay it forward a little bit. Let me actually like take a little bit more, do a little bit more for the environment than just think about ourselves.
Yeah. Well, that's some good Canadian idealism. I hope we see some people doing that. I'm starting to wonder when I see these trends, right? And I think you're right. There's a bit of a Goldilocks effort here to test what's just right in terms of not getting you in trouble and getting a Guardian hit piece, right, when you do avoided emissions, but can we not do what we really need in the long term, which is durable purchases and buy nature based and achieve the same reputational bump, right, for a lot less, right? That's what I'm worried about, right? I mean, I think in the long term that probably requires some kind of regulatory system, right, to do that instead of relying on companies to do the right thing. But I guess we'll
Oh, no,
see.
no, no. And Will, like 100% agree with you. I don't think we can, as a system, expect all companies to start doing the right thing. Um,
I'm just worried about any of them doing the
yeah,
right
yeah,
thing.
even
What
one.
once I start seeing Meta and Microsoft, I mean Microsoft's Scope 3 emissions were up 29% last year, right? They have, in my opinion, have a responsibility to be leading, not just getting patted on the back for it. So we'll see what happens. One
Well, yeah,
other, you
just to
go ahead.
double click on that for 1 second, Will, and you would
Yeah.
say like, Microsoft, which again, like let's all, be grateful for what they've done in this market. But by all accounts, AI has started to increase emissions more, data center usage and so on, and emissions more than perhaps Microsoft, Google, Meta, and so on expected. And
Yeah.
so when you've established this incredibly, leading position of, hey, we're going to be net zero by 2030 and all historical emissions by 2050, and all of a sudden your emissions are actually higher than you projected them to be, that might lead you to sort of rethink how you're going about it. And again, we mentioned Meta, as another example. And so I'm just conjecturing here. This is not based on any information, but you can imagine that internally at the company, if they're saying, hey, if we want to hit 2030 by or net zero by 2030, and we got to bring these emissions down, how much would it cost us if we were doing it solely with durable carbon removal?
Hmm.
And how much money do we have to actually do this? And if we can't get it solely with durable, does it make sense for us to shift the mix a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. I guess it depends on if your profits are going up immensely, which they have as a result of AI and crypto, then maybe you should be allocating more, right? Because you can, right? But I understand. One other question, then we'll move to audience questions. So I'm intrigued, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'm intrigued when you look at the data that you have in terms of costs being reduced in some context, right? Which I agree is salutary and critical, right? But I'm wondering if you've been able to discern if those cost declines from suppliers are mostly attributable to things like a scaling and knowledge diffusion, or is it the need to compete, right? At which point the threat is, as I think the report suggests, that maybe some of the high quality, higher price sort of approaches might be imperiled in the long term. Do you know why prices are declining for certain suppliers?
No, don't have the specifics, but I'll say that both of the factors you mentioned, I think, play into it. I think number one, there's absolutely kind of innovation that's taking place, and it's incumbent upon suppliers to do whatever they can because when you have, forget about competition for a second, but when you have a purchaser saying, oof, I don't want to buy it at that price, but if you can bring it to this price, then that will obviously encourage you to think of innovative ways to do it. But then I think the second thing is competition. At some limit level of competition is actually healthy in
Hmm.
terms of, it does actually guide purchasers in terms of price they're willing to pay, which then has, again, the impact in terms of demand on the companies. But we're also seeing sort of like innovative pricing models where in some cases suppliers are saying, look, if I have a choice between I charge this much now and then I'll charge based on my curve and I'll charge this much now and then later I'll charge this much and then later on that much and so on. And it'll come down over time. And then other cases where if you look at Holocene and their Google deal in September of last year, they essentially forward sold their learning curve, right? They
Hmm.
sold at a price where, and I remember when it was announced and I was speaking with others in the industry, there was a lot of eyebrows went up and a lot
Yeah.
of question like, oh my gosh, like how can they possibly do this? And you think about it, you go, well, number one is like what kind of subsidies are there, right?
Right.
45Q. But then the second thing is beyond that is say, well, at that kind of volume, what would you expect your price to be at? And so you're essentially saying, well, and Google did a pre-purchase, they actually put the money up front. And so if you're a supplier, you're saying, wow, if I can get this money up front, then it'll enable me to do the innovation, which will enable me to actually scale, which will enable me to get to the price. And so you're kind of thinking about like with the future in mind and like forward selling that future price now. So I think all of these, I will say there are some suppliers that are extremely concerned about that approach,
Right.
prices down too quickly.
Yeah.
But I know there's a couple of suppliers that have taken that approach, not only Holcim, but another one as well, and another method,
Hmm.
and it's worked out very well for them, at least
Yeah.
getting them going. So I think each supplier's got to kind of figure out what works for them, uh, recognizing that cash is going to be paramount, like any startup, and whether you get it in order to get financing, you got to get traction with customers. So the number one thing is you got to get traction with customers.
Yeah.
That can bring in cash, and if it doesn't bring in cash, it at least brings in traction, which you can then use to secure financing. So one way or the other, you've got to figure out a way to get customers on board, and that may mean that you actually have to innovate on your not only your technology but your pricing and your business model.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, Gianna Amador and others and Grant Favor, I think recently have been, talking a lot about, what companies do to weather the storm this year, right, and beyond. And I think the more sort of suggestions we have in models, right, the better, right? And that's another interesting one. So thanks for that. Um, uh, Question, does your information include CO2e supply and demand?
I'm not even sure how to, I'm not sure actually the nature of that question. So we are covering, so I guess it's like CO2 equivalent. So I wouldn't say that we're specifically tracking like methane, for example, if that's
Right.
like where what this is getting at. It's carbon dioxide removed, so it tends to be, I don't know that we've actually seen a methane deal. Again,
Mhm.
if that's what the question's getting at. So I think we are tracking sort of carbon dioxide, durable carbon removal, purchases, contracts, and deliveries and retirements.
Okay. Next question. Could you comment further on reasons for the pricing increase in mineralization?
I saw that question come up, and I have looked at this in the past, and I should have prepared for it. There is. I'll have to take a closer look at it, and feel free to follow up with me. You can reach out to the team at CDR.fyi, or I'm at Alex at CDR.fyi. I'm happy to like take a closer look at that and dig into it. I know there was something about it that we thought, huh, that looks a little bit odd, and but there was a reason for it.
Yeah. Do you have any sense if it was a large number of transactions? Do you have any idea what the N was in terms of the increase in mineralization prices?
I don't have it offhand here. Again, we've got that number as well. I will say that, some of these, as you get into some of these methods, I will say mineralization is certainly like a lower number than biochar. Like
Yeah.
biochar is like, tons of numbers. In other ones, we aggregate them. So if you look at MCDR, there's actually five or six, sort of like pathways under MCDR, and we group those all together, and they tend to
Right.
be varying methods, but we can't kind of do them at an individual level because there just isn't enough data. And
Yeah.
so we lump them all together. And mineralization is one that represents four different types. And that's another one that gets lumped together. So there could be a fair amount of variance in the individual methods.
Okay. Thanks. All right. Next question. Do you have any information on how purchasers are using their purchases? And the examples I gave is tradable credits, offsets, and ESG reporting, additional contributions.
I think for the most part, well, I guess there's like purchasers and then there's sort of intermediaries, if you like, or service providers. And so there are companies that are service providers that call themselves purchasers, but to us, the way we define purchaser is the company for whom the credit is retired, the ultimate beneficiary of the credit. That is who we consider a purchaser. And
Mhm.
anybody in the middle that purchases and then resells is to us a service provider. So there are 100%, I can guarantee you that there are a fair number of service providers or intermediaries like brokers, marketplaces, resellers that are purchasing. They can be purchasing as a buying group. They can be purchasing because their clients are saying that they're interested in it. And so, for example, there's trading desks at a lot of the energy companies where their clients come to them and say, hey, we want to offset, and and they'll aggregate and purchase for them because they're more of the experts in it. So that activity absolutely happens. Again, what we're looking at the end of the day is, who's the end purchaser. So I think ultimately these purchasers are, for the most part, using it to offset, their own emissions. It's, to actually put something up there. Now, at this stage, that sort of offset, unless you're a software company and your emissions are very low, it may not make a huge dent in terms of your overall emissions number. So I would say that there's also a significant amount of learning that's taking place, which is,
Mhm.
hey, we need to learn more about this market. Then let's go through the process of what it's like to buy. And sure, we're offsetting, but it's maybe less about that and more about getting smarter for the future and putting learning cheaply, if you like. And by cheaply, I don't mean at low cost, but at low overall, budget in a
Mhm.
sense, in order to allocate bigger budget down the road.
Thanks. All right. This is a question you may not want to answer, but I'll put it out there. It's it's another one of those 10,000 pound elephant in the room questions in every CDR event, I think. How does the Trump presidency, how do you think the Trump presidency will impact CDR over the next 4 years in terms of supply development and demand?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many facets to this. It's really interesting. So you look back to 2024 and we started to see, I started to see kind of like some of the market kind of peter a little bit. And I was, we were kind of like wondering internally, all right, what's causing this? And one factor that came to mind was, well, upcoming election, right?
Hmm.
And whenever there's uncertainty, markets don't like uncertainty, as we're seeing from, by the way, the overall markets. Forget about, we're talking about the overall financial markets aren't liking the uncertainty now.
Yeah.
But, the durable CDR market doesn't like uncertainty either. And so I think there was this, question that would start to arise in companies, purchasers' minds, which is, who's going to actually win this presidency? So I think, it started early on then, a little bit of a freezing effect, if you like. And and then I think we all kind of would have expectations about, what would a Trump presidency be like? And I would say that so far it has been mildly worse than what my expectations were. And the worst part, and not even mildly worse, I'd say probably, a decent amount worse, but not like, it's not off the cliff yet. But, you mentioned Grant Faber earlier. I mean, and the DOE being, pilloried in terms of, their, great people there, a lot of effort on CDR. So that's very disappointing to see because there's a lot of knowledge and learning that is gone. The purchase challenge was on the verge of being, released. They finally went
Yeah.
through legal approvals, and then they had to pull back on that because it would have been too, visible, and the optics wouldn't have been great. Um, you know, Rolling back, obviously pulling out of any kind of climate accord, starting to take companies to court for having received climate funding, calling it a big hoax. Like none of this is obviously positive. Now, flip side of that is like I think a lot of other areas, and I come from Canada, and I know Trump's sort of beating the drum on NATO, and I got to be honest, like I think for countries like Canada that aren't spending enough or up to their commitments on NATO, it's like they absolutely should. Like you make a commitment, fulfill your commitment. And so what I see from a similar perspective on the CDR side is that the Biden administration the last 4 years have been very positive, like huge tailwinds for CDR. With the DAC Hubs program and obviously 45Q and so on, and just like the development of knowledge in DOE. And I think this is a situation where no one's looking to the US for leadership anymore. Like that's been completely taken off the table. And I think it's on everybody else to step up and say, all right, we know this is an issue. This person's in denial and, leading to a lot of other people being in denial about it. But there's a lot of us who recognize this is an issue and it's only going to get worse. And so is our option to sit on our hands and do nothing until someone comes along in 4 years, maybe, and put some more favorable policies in place? Or are there things that we can do now? And again, sitting in Canada, I'd like to see Canada step up and do more. I think Switzerland has done some things. I think Japan is starting to do some things. We recently hosted a webinar with Tencent, and they're doing, something like along the lines of what X Prize is doing.
Hmm.
So want to see more leadership from more countries, and frankly, not only countries, but also intergovernmental and NGO sort of policymakers. It's there's that we're all on a mission. There's all something that we're fighting for here. And so back to sort of like Joseph's question, what are the predictions? What do I think will happen? I think that it's definitely going to have a chilling effect over the next little while. I think that U.S. companies that have represented the vast majority of the purchases uh, may catch some flack. We'll have to see from the administration, but I'm hoping that there's going to be others that actually stand strong and say, you know what, this is the right thing to do. And I'm really hoping that we'll get a diversification of the purchaser base. So maybe the overall numbers, the top level numbers take a little bit of a step back or plateau a little bit for a little while. But if it means that we broaden the purchaser base and get other parties involved, that to me will be long-term positive for the industry.
Hmm. Yeah, we can hope. So, next question. The question essentially is, as you had suggested at the beginning, in terms of the grist for the reports, right? You're getting your information from various sources, primarily publicly available information. But the questioner says they're familiar with at least a couple very large multinational corporations that are building out their own vertically integrated supply to satisfy their CDR needs, such as insetting, right? Um, do you do you have a method, and do you actively seek to capture that kind of data?
Nope. We are tracking sort of like the transactions that happen between a purchaser and seller. I mean, ultimately, if they're doing insetting, then I mean that presumably would be actually reducing their emissions.
Hmm.
So, it would be covered by that part of the equation. And I mean, don't get me wrong, completely encourage that activity. Like hopefully more and more companies do that.
Yeah. So let's see. Next question. Uh, Now, this is one you may not want to step into, but are there any startups or innovators that really stand out to you in carbon removal tech innovation?
Yeah, I'm kind of like no favorites amongst the children, in a sense.
Yeah, that's
We're in favor. We're in favor of anyone who does obviously a good job of scaling the business and doing it with a high level of rigor. I think the easy way to look at this would be to actually look at kind of each of the different methods and see who's leading in each of the methods. And so not having any favorites, but obviously there's companies in DAX that have raised a ton of money and or really building up facilities. There's companies in biochar that are extremely strong in terms of their delivery. I will say one thing generally is that we've seen so not to get to companies per se, but more around methods. We actually did a piece where we looked at certain methods that were rising to the fore, if you like, and the big three, which have represented sort of the leading method of purchase in sort of like 11 of the last 12 quarters were one of either BEX, DAX, or biochar. That doesn't mean that, the other methods aren't viable. They're all viable. They're all, we should be looking at all of them. And MCDR, for example, has a ton of, opportunity, mineralization, enhanced weathering. But for the purchases that have taken place over the last little while, it's been DAX, and that's been fueled by policy in the US. It's
Mhm.
BEX, which has been fueled by policy in the Nordics. And
Right.
it's biochar, where it delivers here and now, has a viable business model, lower cost, and has an opportunity to actually benefit from lower costs or structures in the global south. So those are the sort of three that I would say for where we are right now those are the reasons that account for their appearing at the top of the leaderboards in terms of purchase numbers. But note that in two of those cases, there's a significant degree of policy help. And
Hmm.
so I think as you brought up earlier, we're in a state where we definitely want voluntary market. We definitely want leaders stepping up. but 100% policy is what's going to really help fuel this market in the longer term. And that's been absolutely proven with, the growth in supply and DAX in the US and BEX in the Nordics.
Well, that's a good way to key in on a question that I had. Looking at again in the non-policy realm, I'm curious to see your take on SBTI's new proposed standards. Right now, obviously these are in draft form. They're open for public comment, and it's a bit of an organic process, I think, in terms of what they'll ultimately recommend. But I'm curious if you think that their recommendations on how to revise their standards in the context of removals might help move the needle in terms of increasing corporate demand in the medium term.
Yeah, so great question. In fact, actually, we just posted a LinkedIn poll about it on the CDR.fyi website. So I encourage everyone, or on the CDR.fyi LinkedIn company page, I encourage everyone to go, respond to that. And the question we asked, Will, was almost exactly what you did, which was, how much is it going to, how effective will it be in fueling demand, in durable CDR? And it's either very effective somewhat, little or not at all. Um, I think if I'm just going to be really candid, I think that what they came out with is disappointing. I think they came out with something which is better than nothing, but it's far short of what is needed in order to scale this market. And I think it's also short-sighted in terms of expecting that this market can just develop overnight without actually some form of guidance. I have I have spoken to companies that are signatories to SBTI who have said flat out, and this is before the release, but who said flat out, we have no incentive for investing in carbon removal. We get
Hmm.
no credit for it. And what you're seeing in this new standard, and again, I'll rely more on Robert and others in terms of like the policy kind of deep dive, but my top level take is great. There's a little bit of guidance there. And so there's a little bit of incentive. But what we need in order to scale this market, which again is technology, engineered removals, which have a technology learning curve, and require lower prices, which only we can get to as we come down the learning curve, is we need much greater priming of the pump of demand. So better than nothing, but oh my gosh, if you are in this space, please respond and provide feedback that it has got to be increased in terms of the guidance from SBTI.
Do you think there's a bit of a balancing act there that if STBI recommends what is really needed, right, including a lot more emphasis on scope 3 emissions, uh, a lot more emphasis on not just providing, commendations to companies that do durable carbon removal, but actually requiring it as part of the standards. Do you think there's a risk that they won't be able to grow the ranks of companies that commit to SBTI, or that a lot of them will peel off and you end up with even a worse result? I know that counterfactual is hard to look at, but I can see that being one of the kind of pragmatic sort of balancing acts that SPTI is facing right now.
Yeah, and I think it's a totally fair point, and I think there's definitely been examples of companies who have dropped their SBTI commitments, right?
Yep.
Just like there's companies who've dropped out of Frontier, there's companies who dropped out of SBTI, and so there is a balancing act there. But I think it's incumbent upon, like the science is the science, right? At the end of the day, and I think we've got to educate everybody about the science, and the science is that we're going to need more durable carbon removal, and the only way to get more durable carbon removal is to scale it, and the only way to scale it is to actually put more into it. So I don't think we can escape hard facts. I mean, I hear your point, but I think that maybe there's more education that is required. It doesn't take away from the need. It just is like, how do we actually get to that?
Yeah, I agree. I hope they'll lead in that context and try to educate them why it's important to increase the integrity rather than, lowest common denominator. But time will tell. But I agree with you. Everybody in the CDR community, it's incumbent upon us to weigh in on this process because I take them at their word. I think it is a work in progress, and as was true in the development of the Article 6.2 and 6.4 standards in Paris when the CDR community weighed in, and you saw radical, and in my mind, salutary sort of changes in the evolution of those documents. I think if the community, given the brain power we have, if it weighs in on this process, can help make a difference. So I encourage everybody to do that. So we are at I usually say the top of the clock, but we start a half hour later, so we're at the bottom of the clock. And it is time for us to depart. And I'd first of all like to once again thanks Alex for summarizing the report, all of his insights. Thanks to everyone in the audience for thoughtful questions as always. We will be back next month with a couple of more episodes. Look for us in places like the CDR forum of LinkedIn for the announcement or our mailing list. And once again, to everyone, thank you and goodbye now.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Will. Thanks, everyone.